think we just need to take a minute and feel the gift that was just given to us. Thank you. So it's always an honor and a gift to have somebody from the community come and share their wisdom, in Lance's case, his great talents. And joining us today is Dr. Carol Goldsmith. Everybody say hi. Wave to the people up there. There we go. Dr. Goldsmith has just recently taken on the daunting task of becoming the Chancellor of the State Center Community College District. It's a huge task. It's a really big district with, is it 5 colleges now? 4 colleges. When I started, there was 2, Reedley and Fresno. So she served, however, before that as president of Fresno City College, and before that, president of West Hills Community College. So she has been around the block. She wanted me to tell you that she is most proud of the work done collectively to transform our colleges to become an anti-racist institution. And to get the collective to focus on student success and justice. So I decided I got to make a personal note since I retired from the district, and I've now, I retired after 33 years and I'm teaching still, so I think we're at 36 or so. And so I've been able to witness Dr. Goldsmith in action. Foremost in my mind, there are 2 things that I immediately thought of and thought I'd share with you because, to be honest, people can say, oh yeah, I do the justice thing for my, I want students to be successful, but I have real evidence. So, you guys remember the COVID thing? When that hit, we all know how hard it was. But in education, I know Kim knows as a teacher, education was hit really hard. How in the world do you still continue to do your job in a virtual world? And what I witnessed with Dr. Goldsmith was that her leadership, in my opinion, was not only efficient, check, and effective, check, but it was compassionate. It was compassionate. She conveyed such care and concern for employees and students and went above and beyond coming up with equitable solutions and meaningful communications through videos and meetings and meetings and meetings and support groups and other tools. Secondly, her personal and professional response to the raising of the pride flag on the Fresno City College campus, and her influence, by the way, on the mayor because of that action. That was moving, and it was also evidence of a heart for social justice for all. I look forward to seeing where she takes the district, as I think I'm going to keep going. And I know it will have creativity, compassion, and justice at its core. So we will hear from Dr. Goldsmith after we stand, as we are able, to sing our hymn, For the Beauty of the Earth.
Whew. Let's thank Lance again for that grateful praise. I also want to thank Lori for that just delightful and very welcoming introduction. Thank you, Lori. And thank you, Janice and Lisa, for being here. It's wonderful meeting you today. And ladies and gentlemen, I think we all want to thank Lance and Lorenzo, but for their musical talents. And Lance, and especially Lance, for being so vulnerable with us today and showing strength and grace. I think your ancestors and your mom and dad are very proud of you. Yeah. So I want to start my little timer because they told me I had 15 to 20 minutes. So I don't want to go over. I'm just so grateful to be here today, and I just want to thank everyone here at the Unitarian Universal Church to spend your time with me this morning, because you could have hit snooze one more time. I appreciate seeing you in real life and not in a little box, although I'm happy to see you out in the virtual world as well. So David, Goliath, and the Good Samaritan. When I first suggested this title, some of my friends and some of my colleagues asked, why are you making the connection between these three characters? How are they connected? And more importantly, why are you discussing Christian theology with a liberal faith group like the Unitarian Universalists? Well, don't be alarmed. I'm not here to preach any Christian dogma, quite the opposite. As a historian by trade and an educator by love and profession, I know all too well that the Judeo-Christian references that I'm going to make today are steeped in our culture. They're steeped in our idioms. They're steeped in our legal system. And as some of our educators can attest to, maybe they're steeped in our educational system as well. And like you, I often see how parables and stories can be used to teach, can be learned. We could take these opportunities and these stories to learn more about our sacred responsibility to act in the interest of all people, not just the chosen few, and how we can learn how we must prioritize and protect the most vulnerable among us. In the weeks leading to this moment, I was struggling with what to talk about. In fact, I kind of had monkey mind and I was all over the place. You know that, okay. As I was preparing for our time together in quiet reflection and meditation, I was struck by the level of stress and trauma and conflict that we've all collectively experienced during these last few challenging years. And I kept coming back to the trials and tribulations of the pandemic, of climate change, and the most daily attacks on issues around social justice and just personal individual liberties. And it almost seems like every day there's a new social, racial, climate, and health crisis unfolds before our very eyes every day. And this leaves many of us tired and weary, and perhaps we're looking for a new model or a proven model of action and responsibility so we can better respond to those in need, to better support those who face injustice. So it was the notion of David and Goliath came to be. Thank you for the water, by the way. That was a great idea. So you might be thinking, these three characters really, I thought we could use them to examine our own responses to crisis and situational crisis and the daily challenges and even the mighty challenges that face us that we know are all coming. So can these ancient parables and ancient characters provide modern lessons to those of us who are working for justice? I believe so. How can we look towards these characters to ignite our compassion? By re-examining these characters, I believe we might be able to find new ways of approaching the challenges we face today. Perhaps the parable would offer words of wisdom as we can draw conclusions about how we should show up and protect those who are on the side of love and justice and peace at the core of everything we do. So today, in these next few minutes, through these stories, we'll share a few and explore a few ideas. One, that much of what we consider to be of value in this world arises from lopsided conflicts, because the act of facing overwhelming odds often produces greatness and beauty. Two, we consistently get conflicts wrong. We often misread them. We often misinterpret them. Giants are not always what we think they are. The same qualities that appear to give them strength are often the sources of their greatest weakness and fear. Being an underdog can change people in ways that we often fail to appreciate. It can open up doors, provide enthusiasm, and create opportunities, and educate and enlighten ways to make possible right what otherwise we might have thought unthinkable. And we need a better way of identifying these giants. And lastly, having the intent to help is good, but acting on the intent is much, much better. So what can these characters teach us today about the seemingly dangerous paths that are in our world today? Well, in modern usage, the phrase David and Goliath has taken on a secular meaning, denoting an underdog in a situation. A contest where the smaller, weaker opponent faces a much bigger, stronger adversary, and if successful, the underdog may win in an unusual or surprising way. So think about these characters and how perverse they are in our dominant culture. In fact, some of you may have read the book David and Goliath by Maxwell Gladwell. It was a recent book, New York Times bestseller. Gladwell aptly describes David and Goliath as characters as a study so we can think about disadvantages and advantages, and how advantages of Goliath may actually turn into disadvantages. Gladwell illustrates this so vividly that the underdog victories are much less miraculous, thus making them more achievable for the everyday Joe. So he did a great job on shedding light on how we might reimagine our own perceived weaknesses and strengths, and how we must work together to protect the most vulnerable. The Good Samaritan, through merciful actions, restored the human dignity of the anonymous man who was traveling on a very dangerous path, one that was fraught with violence. The parable reveals virtues such as compassion, mercy, solidarity, generosity, and hospitality. The analysis of this character shows the demonstration of the first and second principle of the Unitarian Universalist: the inherent worth and dignity of every person, and justice, equity, and compassion in all human relations. So David and Goliath, for those of you who don't know the story, Goliath was this big guy, mighty, powerful, and he was one of the best warriors of the time. And his army was out to have a fight. And so he asked the other army to send over their mightiest warrior. And no one was brave enough to face Goliath. He was threatening in size, was well protected in armor. In fact, he was incredibly well armed. No one said and no one volunteered, except one guy. Well, David, the shepherd boy. So David refused to use any of the weapons offered to him by his fellow colleagues in the army, although he was just a boy and they didn't really see his worth until that moment. He decided to use what he knew best: slingshot. The parable describes the angst and the tension leading up to that moment. And then, as David summons up the courage and the bravery to run towards this giant, the overconfident Goliath calls out, "Am I a dog? You're going to chase me with the stick?" Making fun of David. So despite all that tension and that ridicule, David takes a little tiny rock, an old-fashioned slingshot, shoots it, hits the giant in the head, boom, falls dead. Yeah, that's what happened. And conventional wisdom would dictate that courage alone may be enough to fight the big fight and defeat giants of this world. However, a deeper analysis of this parable reveals that it was really never about the fight. It wasn't even about the battle. It's about how we all have strengths and weaknesses, and how do we use them to take advantage to make our way through the world, and I would argue, make the world a better place. On the surface of this story, it would appear that anyone who had thought they had the courage to go against a mighty giant like Goliath would be at a great disadvantage. You're outgunned, you're outnumbered, Goliath was huge, covered with armor, powerful swords, and experienced in traditional fighting. So it seemed like he had every advantage. But in reality, those were the very reasons Goliath was defeated. He was overconfident. We see that today, people being arrogant, overconfident. So what conventional wisdom calls a disadvantage often plays out to advantage, don't you think? How many of you know anybody who's visually impaired or blind? I do, right? And I will tell you that their sensory capabilities are much better than mine. And I would defer to call anyone normal because there is no normal. All of us have disadvantages and advantages. In the book that Malcolm Gladwell wrote, he referred to recent research that talked about dyslexics having an advantage in winning over people because they've developed coping mechanisms to get along with others. From arguing their way around on how to get a better grade, to perhaps becoming a college president or a chancellor. Yeah, I was diagnosed as a learning disability as a kid. But I did not let that label define who I was. I wasn't a David, I wasn't a Goliath, but I was lucky enough to have adults like many of you in my life. Many of you who did not see a label or a perceived strength or weakness. Rather, I was guided by loving, caring individuals like yourself who understand the inherent worth and dignity of every person. So I leaned into being me. The story of David and Goliath is really about playing to your strengths. One look at David, people would have laughed at him, thinking he's foolish. What's this little guy going to do against that great big guy? No one stopped him. But everybody laughed. But he knew what his strengths were, and he didn't opt to use any other traditional tools that were given to him. He knew what he was good at. He knew what the end goal was, he played to his strengths, and he won that battle. Now, just to be clear, I'm not saying that I'm an advocate for violence or the use of violence to solve any conflict. That's nothing further from the truth. But the story can illustrate an inherent ability for us to tackle and take on the big challenges of our times. And there's a few challenges on the horizon. Let's talk about that. Today, we know that the fights on our horizon are some of the biggest challenges ahead. Perhaps some of you are sitting and thinking about the Supreme Court's ruling that's expected to take next month. As you know, that pending decision with half a century of privacy rights in the balance may certainly represent a challenge and put us all on a dangerous path. Or maybe it's the fight for self-determination. We have all been watching a mighty challenge play out today in a seemingly modern David and Goliath story, the war in the Ukraine. Or perhaps it's the fight to dismantle white supremacy, to confront and call out racism, to deal with our racist past, and work together to implement an affirmation of being anti-racist. Maybe that's it. Maybe it's the fight that we look inward to ourselves as we're trying to build a better culture that is more just. So as we face these challenges on the horizon, we know the path ahead will probably be filled with some conflict and perhaps even a little danger. We may have to choose which character or which character traits we want to portray in the story of our lives, our reactions to challenges. Will we be David, the underdog, who's going to take on a big challenger? Or will we be Goliath, the larger, more better prepared, perhaps a little arrogant guy? I believe the world is filled with both David and Goliath. And in reality, neither are strong, and neither are weak. In reflection, if you think about the human condition, many of us are just trying to coexist, especially these last 2 years, just trying to coexist. Some of us are fighting our own inner battles. Some of us are looking at the challenges that we have today on the horizon and thinking, there's just too much. I can't do anything about this, and perhaps we're paralyzed to act. So what are we going to do when the crisis hits your home, hits you, in your neighborhood, in your family? Maybe there's some lessons to be learned from the parable of the Good Samaritan. Like the characters of David and Goliath, the references of the Good Samaritan are dominant in our culture. In fact, there's a Good Samaritan law on the books. That law is intended to offer legal protection to those of us who provide reasonable action to assist those who are in peril. To assist those in peril. So let me give you a quick summary of the Good Samaritan. It's a parable and a story that serves as an example by providing aid to those who we may not know or who may not be part of our birth tribe, and we might not even know them at all. And yeah, in case you're wondering, this is the parable that created the love your neighbor as yourself. It stems from this parable. The detailed story can be found in the biblical text of Luke chapter 10, verses 25 through 37. The story is reportedly told by Christ, who was talking to a lawyer, which in and of itself is kind of a funny situation if you think about it, but I won't go there. In the story, it's about a man who was traveling this kind of dangerous road. He was beaten and robbed and left for dead. Left for dead. Then a priest comes by. And what does he do? He walks across the street to avoid the man who was beaten. He does nothing. And then a little while later, a Levite, a member of the Hebrew tribe, comes upon the victim, and he too did nothing. Then later, a good Samaritan came by, stopped and showed compassion. He helped the man. He provided first aid. He gave him comfort. He took him to the inn nearby. He gave the innkeeper money, and he said, take care of him. And then he added, if you have to spend more, I'll pay you when I come back. And there's one more important note from a historical and literary point of view. The audience of the assigned storyteller back in the day when this ancient story first happened was the Jewish people. And at the time, the Jews and the Samaritans were they despised each other. So the historical context and the meaning adds value to this story. Fear, xenophobia, and racial prejudice has always been the great divider among people and nations, since ancient times to present. We tend to distrust others who don't look like us, sound like us, or believe like us, or pray like us. But the Samaritan didn't care. He showed us that racism has no place in this world. He didn't ask the guy what church he went to, how he voted. He just helped. He responded quickly with compassion. So what does this show us? Love your neighbor as you love yourself. You should put aside your differences to help those who are in peril, who are in need. The Samaritan saw someone in need in the roadside, and he helped. And he did so in the face of potential danger. And he did so, and it cost him time, and it cost him money. And yet he did not hesitate to offer that assistance. Today, I know we're facing some challenges on the horizon, and the path ahead will probably be filled with threats, and we're going to have to choose which character we want to portray in the story of our lives. Will we be like David, the young underdog taking on the challenger, headed into the challenge with great courage, not really well prepared, but standing on the conviction of knowing yourself? Or will we be like Goliath, the older, wiser, more prepared, although maybe a little arrogant? Or will we be like the Good Samaritan and surprise everybody by stopping along the side to offer help to someone we do not know who's more vulnerable and is in need of great compassion? When the situation presents itself to you, and it will, I urge you to look at options. Look beyond conventional wisdom. Perhaps your biggest perceived disadvantage will become your greatest advantage. Will we stop to help? Will we share the resources of time and money to be able to provide to help those who we don't even know? I, for one, hope that we will. My hope is that we will rise to the moment because we believe in justice and equity and compassion in human relations. And I am confident that when we learn and work together with the goal of creating a world of community of peace and liberty and justice for all, we will be remembered that we are connected. Perhaps like David, being a little braver, perhaps like Goliath, maybe being prepared, and always like the Good Samaritan, being ready to help. So as we just try to make our way through the journey, let's be reminded of the story and the song today, talking about the song of prayer, where it says, love will guide us, peace has tried us, hope inside us will lead the way on the road from greed to giving. Love will guide us through the hard night. Ladies and gentlemen, it has been my great pleasure to be here with you today, and my deepest gratitude for your actions that you've done to help our community. And I'm going to thank you in advance for helping and rising to the occasion when the moment presents itself, because big or small, I know that you will step up to help our community. Thank you again.